Hey everyone, this is John here, and with me is David. We're back
Hello.
to do the rest of the feedback as promised, or all of the feedback. It's going to be about a 2-hour pod. We already recorded most of it, and we're recording the rest of it today. So hope you all enjoy. Of course, join us for Shogun. If you didn't know, we're covering that next with full coverage. We got plenty of other stuff we'll talk about at the end. And here is the feedback with Ron. You know, this is usually where we say where you can send us things. Unfortunately, this is the last episode of the season, but you can still send us emails at lorehounds@thelorehounds.com. Hop on our Discord server, go to the website, send us a contact form entry or a voicemail, whatever you want to do to get your opinions to us if you want to chat.
Yeah, the discussion's still rolling on the Discord too. So
Yeah, I like I said, today they were debating whether it should have been a True Detective season. That's a cool conversation. So yeah, definitely hop in on there. I guess, David, you and I are going to alternate reading feedback, and then the three of us can react to it.
yeah, as we go along. Yeah, and I think as I was compiling the feedback, I thought, oh well, maybe I should break apart these things, or I have 4 documents and I've got over 1,500 words of notes from the last few days of just my brain leaking out. And so I thought, you know what? No, let's just stick with the listeners. Thank you everyone who wrote in, because they're all really thoughtful responses. And I think pretty much all of the major issues that I would have wanted to touch on are touched on at some point in somebody's email. And so I figured that's just the easiest time saver for us, is to framework off of everybody's email. So
Cool. All right, let's start off. I'll start with the first email from Arya. It's a first-time emailer, and her email does a lot to frame some key issues. They start off, "Hi, David and John. I'm a first-time listener to the podcast. I found you guys while trying to find True Detective Night Country content, and I'm glad I did. I enjoyed your thoughtful critique of the show." Well, thanks, Arya. "I absolutely loved Night Country. As a woman of color, it was so refreshing to see complex female characters and get to spend time among an indigenous community. I think the scope of the show was grand, and it's debatable whether it delivered on the detective aspect of a true detective show. However, there are so many things to love about it. I thought the finale was amazing. I liked that it was the overlooked women of the community that set things right. Unfortunately, I've seen some social media criticism centered around the fact that the show's central voice represents the indigenous community. Something about being, quote, woke Hollywood. I also found it very off-putting that the original creator, Nick Pizzolatto, has gone out of his way multiple times to really undermine what Issa Lopez has done this season. I thought Issa did an amazing job, and I'm hoping to see more from her in the future. Thanks for providing such great commentary on the show, Arya." So, very thoughtful email. I feel like that echoed a lot of what we just talked about, especially you, Ron. You brought up the detective aspect of the show too, and how that was a little weaker. And also brought up, we didn't bring up, but Arya brought up Nick Pizzolatto. I don't know what he's doing out there, but it's not good. It's not good.
and it's only been a couple of comments on a couple of threads. It's a very minimal amount, but everybody's on high alert. And so when they saw anything, it was like instant. It was like a wildfire got lit. And I think that's just something you don't do. You just keep your mouth shut in Hollywood.
He's burning bridges left
big
and right.
time.
Yeah.
And he's going to be getting bigger checks because the season franchise is going up. He's keeping his EP credit, his executive producer credit.
Right.
So he's going to get a bump. So be quiet and collect your checks, man.
Very odd. Very odd. And I think HBO, if I were at HBO, I'd be hesitant to work with him again, right? Is because I don't know if he's going to try to sabotage my own franchise later.
There was a show, gentlemen, have you ever seen the cartoon Fat Albert?
Oh yeah, I grew up.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Little bit.
Maybe.
yeah.
And then I saw the awful live action movie they made at some point.
I
go back. I go back.
I bring up Fat Albert because there's one character who would say something along the lines, Nick Pizzolatto is like school on Saturday afternoon. No class. In terms of these comments that he's making, I just think it's just, and I feel like Issa Lopez's response to him is the epitome of class. She kept it she kept it high when he went low. She kept it high. I just felt like, as the creator of the show, you are almost like you're like the Godfather. You're the one who started this. And I mean Godfather as in a traditional Godfather, not like a Godfather movie
Right, right, right,
type
right.
Godfather.
Oranges.
Right. And he should have been the kind of person who represented a role model for everyone in this industry. And instead, he kind of represented like the worst of the internet. And, going back to the letter that we received, the negativity on social media, again, the kind of comments he made fuels that kind of thing. I saw interviews of him from season 1, and he kind of just from the interview, I kind of feel like he had he almost exudes sort of like pomposity. I don't know if that's a real
Mhm.
word, but it just
The vibes are off, as the
the
kids say.
vibes are off, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. He could have been a person who could have been supporting her, and I think when it comes to these issues of people in demographics that are traditionally underserved, whether it be women or people of color, oftentimes it it is people who are in the majority demographic, whether it's men supporting women or it is white people supporting people of color. He represents, I assume he's a cisgender straight man. I don't know for sure, but he's definitely like a white man.
He
And
codes that way out here as we're receiving
right,
him, right?
right. And he is in a position, being a man in that position, to be a powerful ally to people of color. Even if behind closed doors he's not crazy about it, he could have been. There was a lost opportunity for him to be an amazing role model, to be the kind of person that people would be writing positive things about, like this is how you do it in Hollywood. And instead he just kind of subdued to the lowest common denominator. So
Yeah.
I felt that was unfortunate.
And I think it's a shame that we're talking. We kind of have to talk about it because
Mm-hmm.
when I hear an interview with Issa Lopez, she's passionate, she's thoughtful, she's done so much research in the genre. She's watched all these other shows that people keep referencing. Oh, it's like this show, or it's like that show. She
Right.
watched those shows, and
Exactly.
she used them to steer away from them or steer into them. And she has been on record multiple times saying that she loves season 1 and that this is a part of what she was doing was an homage to season 1, as a love for season 1, to pick it up where he left off, where certain things got left off, and let's have some fun, and let's sit around the campfire and tell some more stories with these crazy Tuttles, and these crazy Rust Coles. Like, who cares if it's contiguous from one season to the next? It's a campfire story, right? We're having fun. We're enjoying, and she's doing it out of a sense of love and enjoyment. And for me, when I look at Issa Lopez as a woman director, a strong woman director, as a creative, I'm just really proud that she's been able. For her, she's just standing her ground. She's like, I created something out of love, but if you don't like it, don't watch it. But you're obviously watching it because you're every episode you're complaining about it. So, and she's just like, okay, whatever.
And this is also her first, it looks like from her Wikipedia, it's her first American TV run ever.
Yeah.
And she had only done a telenovela in 2000. So 24 years ago, she did a telenovela. But other than that, this is her only TV run. And she did an amazing job for it being her first big
Definitely.
TV run.
Absolutely. And yeah, I thought she did great. I thought the way she handled it was great. It was unfortunate, the way he had handled it, especially when you consider it wasn't even her idea to make it
Right.
a true
To be
detective. It's like, dude, it wasn't my plan to have this be a true detective show, but since it became one, I'm going to make it be the best one that I can possibly make it in the context of this original grander story that I have. So that's the other thing that kind of, it's almost like she got a raw deal in a sense.
Yeah.
In one sense, but in another sense, because it was True Detective, like we said earlier, I think there was a huge bump that she got from it.
I think hopefully people will warm up to her for season 5.
Yeah.
Maybe people are like, all right, this is now the person at the helm. It's not Nick Pizzolatto anymore. He's not coming back. Let's just lead into this. I hope. Or maybe, the toxic fans see themselves out, right? They say, I'm done with this. And we all sit here and we enjoy our campfire story with Issa Lopez.
The irony of season 1 is, like you were saying before, Ron, was that he wasn't even intentionally leaning into the supernatural. It was sort of the vapors or the fumes that were coming off of it that everybody was getting high from. And then we all loved it. Oh my God, it's so metaphysical. It's so, psychological and Carcosa and Yellow King. And so Lopez was like, this is great. I'm going to lean into it. And I'm going to use Inupiaq native cultural stories to accentuate that. And I'm going to have it rhyme with season 1, right? Yellow King, Blue Crab, right? We're going to, spiral going one way. Well, my spiral is going to go the other way, right? They're inverse of each other. And I think that's great. And I love the fact that she was able to recenter the story locus so effectively, and to really invert the whole thing. It's like, okay, the first 3 seasons are very male dominated. So, okay, let's take 2 women who are in similar positions, high stress, high pressure, guardians, police, law, justice, all that stuff we want to talk about. And let's flip it. And then like, how would a couple of women deal with this? And then like but like fold in this, these cultural elements from the Inupiaq communities.
Yeah. Speaking of that, one of the things that the letter brought up was it Arya is her name?
Yeah.
I always think of Arya from Game of Thrones, but I think it's a different Arya.
It's a popular name now. We actually know people who've named their kids.
Oh, that's crazy. Anyway, so, yeah. Or it's Ira. Anyway, she's being a woman of color and thinking the season finale was amazing. I won't even call this a bone to pick. One of the things that actually didn't follow me, actually, John, I think when I was listening to you and David talk about the finale, I think you said you liked this. And I know from some TikTok videos I've seen, lots of people love the scene, like where all the Inupiaq women came in and they stood their ground, and they told their story. I personally, and hey, I am a biggest proponent for women, people of color, fair representation. I thought this show overall was a great example of that. For me personally, I felt like this is an example that for me didn't work that well in terms of, and let me explain why.
Break it down.
I feel like it's really when you are telling stories of people of color or any kind of person in an unrepresented group in Hollywood, whether you're making them heroes or whatnot, sometimes it's a hard needle to thread to do it in such a way where it doesn't feel like it is, where it feels like that's what you're purposely trying to do, and it's a nuanced thing. So like
it is really a nuanced thing. Agreed. I totally agree.
Having these women come in and stand is like, yeah, women of color, this is so cool, and I feel like it is being too. It's like shouting out almost. I don't know if didactic is the right word, but like I love the fact that they were the ones who did it. I love the fact that these are invisible women. Even the flashback into how it happened, I love that. But it just kind of feels like, okay, this is the scene for applause. So another example that comes to mind is the girl boss scene in Endgame. And where there's a scene in the last Endgame where like all the women superheroes are getting behind Captain America because they're going to go kick ass and take names. And it's meant to be like this girl boss scene. And a lot of people loved it. That was one for me. It was a little eye rolly for me because one, they were doing it behind Captain America. And for me, that was kind of like Jimmy Olsen going up to Superman saying, I got your back, Superman. It's like,
yeah.
Captain America, she doesn't need your help. She is actually, I think there's a how it should have ended episode that actually, I think, addresses that exact topic. So to me, that's an example where it feels like, okay, we're trying to show in an overtop way amazing women. examples where I feel like it works well. The fight scenes in Black Panther. You see all these beautiful, strong African people kicking ass and taking names. The context makes sense because they're in Africa. Or the Women King fighting scenes. That's another example, I think, where it felt real. David and you and I recently were talking about Mr. and Mrs. Smith. There's this scene where Jane Smith this isn't a spoiler, but anyway, she's in this brawl fighting with this one dude, and she's kicking ass. I mean, she's taking some hits, but she's kicking ass. And any scene where you have like a male and female partner, and the guy partner is going to go try to help, but the woman partner is like holding her own. Like, that's an example where I feel like it works, where it's not over the top trying to make a message. And so for me personally, I felt like this scene in the finale kind of felt like that. Like, okay, let's show all these.
It's too on the nose.
It was too That's a great way of explaining it. It was too on the nose. Yeah.
Right. As opposed to some little, like, or if Danvers had, so here we are rewriting the show. If Danvers had started to construct, wait a minute, I saw that woman and we found this evidence over here. And then she started to stitch it together instead of the Justice League assembling before us.
Right,
and going,
right.
We did it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to push back a little bit on
in defense. Absolutely.
I'm gonna defend this scene a little bit. I think that you can draw a clear distinction between this and let's say, the Avengers Women Assemble deal, because the Avengers Women Assemble, those are all people who would hold their own against that enemy alone. And it's almost a victory lap, right? It's we don't need each other. We're just here to kind of have a little victory lap. Here, you have the story being told by one older cleaning woman who, if she was alone, really good chance she gets arrested by Danvers and Navarro. And the only reason she doesn't is because all of the invisible women come one by one behind them, and they casually stand there.
Well, they'll come in and they check in with B too. They touch her on the shoulder or a nod or something. It's so there's this active thing going on. It's not,
And I think that the nature of it being a TV show and a screen production kind of takes away from it. But in my head, they're there for like over an hour listening to B talk, right? And these women are getting calls like, "Come support B." Come be part of the family.
Or they see the Salal van outside, B's house, and they're like, what's that about?
Right. And that's a headcanon, so that's, part of my own defense, but you don't have to accept it.
I think you're winning me over, John. I like that. Because I only saw it the one time, and as I think back into how it played out, I like that. I like that. You give me something to think about. I appreciate that. I could see that.
I think back to a real example of how the United States oppressed indigenous communities. And when, after the Trail of Tears, after, everyone was forced to leave and brutally oppressed, the U.S. government at some point needed to give some land back to Native Americans. And to do that, and still quietly oppress indigenous populations, they started saying, okay, you have these two plots of land. One is 50 miles away from another, and you have no car. So if you don't go to that land, if you don't go to either one for X amount of time, it goes back to the government and we're going to sell it. And so they did that, and they very quickly were able to sell most of the land to white people. Most of the land to non-native populations. And the point I'm trying to make here, I'm getting there, I promise, is, the oppressors are very good at dividing and conquering. And what this native community came together and did was they said, okay, you can go arrest B, but you're not arresting everybody in this room. You don't have the manpower. Your police force is weak. You couldn't solve this murder. You couldn't solve Annie K's murder. You couldn't stop the water from being poisoned. You can't stop the mine from walking all over you. And we will solve the problem. So you can try to take us in, but overall, we did what we came here to do.
You make a strong argument. You make a strong argument.
Which gets into this whole other question, which we should probably put a pin in and pick it up later, because I know there's another email that has touches on this, but law versus justice. You know, the institutions of authority and legal, and why we set up legal frameworks versus, vigilantism. But then we've got these other axes of law and justice. And so I think there's some fun things to talk about in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No,
but maybe we should move on.
Get better.
Yeah, for sure. Jaya, who is a self-identified couch detective, sent in an email. I think Jaya understood the assignment. So their email starts off, in addition to the Sedna myth there's the myth of the narwhal, and they provided a link to notable works of narwhal art. Narwhals are real animals, the so-called unicorns of the sea. The horn is actually a spiral-shaped tooth that only the male narwhals have. So there are many, Jaya points out that there are many narwhal dental references throughout the whole season. A unicorn on a little girl's t-shirt at the hairdresser's. The police station was an old dental office. Kayla bites Pete in the first episode. The scientists bite themselves. SpongeBob toothbrush, teeth whitening. The laundromat grandmother, Kayla's grandmother, went to the dentist's when she was away for a while. There was hair in the washing machine, parallels the myth of how narwhals' horns were first formed. So I think what Jaya is picking up on here is I don't think that it was intentional. I don't know if it was intentional, but again, the construction between Lopez and her team, her production designers and everybody else, there's all these little rhyming couplets all throughout the show, which makes it for a more interesting and rich context, I think. The whole tooth thing, I completely didn't pick up on. I didn't think that there were two things. And then, of course, with Peter's, plucking the tooth out of the corner of the wall. So Jai continues, lots of references to blindness as well. Not seeing, Danvers can't find her glasses, drinking homebrew. And then there's, obviously with Holden and the eye playing the peekaboo game. And then I'm kind of paraphrasing Jaya's email here. Danvers is blind to her own pain at first and blind to the community's suffering. But eventually, when she becomes whole, she can see again. And she can see what justice means in that particular case when she's confronting the group of women. And then Jaya went on with some other stuff that was all just a bunch of notes. But the one last thing I wanted to point out was that Kavik fixed Navarro's dislocated finger by fake proposing. And then this plays into some more of the Sedna, some of the larger Sedna mythology about how he takes care of his dogs and how that sort of makes him a good character in this larger mythological context. So good job, Jai, on picking up on some of these more subtle themes that are laced throughout. Did you guys see anything else that you wanted to pick up on in terms of the mythology or the deeper couplets of the show?
I just want to say thank you for telling me that narwhals are real, because ever since I saw them in like Rudolph's, Island of Misfit Toys or something, I always thought that was like some kind of North Pole myth.
Oh, you're being silly.
No, I'm not. I didn't think that narwhals were real until this email.
Yeah, it's in. What are you thinking of the elf scene in Elf?
Yeah, I think I am. Yes. I think you're right.
Where Elf is leaving, he's like, "Hi, Mr. Narwhal."
Yeah, you're right. You're right. That's it.
I knew they were real, but I had never actually seen a photo of a real one. So when I clicked on that link to look at some photos of actual real ones, I didn't know it was.
They only exist.
That's crazy.
I thought that was really the biological truth of them. Only
it's a
claymation.
It's a tooth that comes up out of their it's one of their lower it's not a canine tooth, but it's like one of their, I forget what dental they're called. It's one of the front two sort of incisors.
That's crazy.
I guess. And it spirals out and pokes a hole through their lip and then grows out. It's super sensitive, and they don't know if it's used for fighting, for feeding, like if they can swish it around and stun fish, or if it's actually used to poke holes in the ice, or all of the above. So
I mean, the first line of this article is contrary to what some may think, narwhals do in fact exist.
It's crazy.
So I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me and Buddy the Elf. All right. Shall we move on to Kyle M.,
Yes.
a newly minted Lorehound, posted on the Patreon thread for the episode 6 podcast and then sent in an email. On Patreon, Kyle said, was Leah the baby crying after Wheeler was killed?
I think this is a hard no, because we know that Jake, her partner, was Leah's father from before. But
yeah, no, I don't think so.
Yeah. But the fact that there was that baby cry in that scene was shocking.
All right. I'm going to continue this email now. If I'm being 100% honest, and I always try to be, then I need to admit my biggest gripe with this finale is what happens with Kavik. Or, more to the point, what doesn't happen. Why doesn't he get to be with Navarro? Why doesn't she get to be with him? Kavik is the best, making pancakes, cracking jokes, cleaning his teeth with a novelty children's toothbrush. And hey, no one loves the recurring joke about his SpongeBob toothbrush more than me, but that's all we get to close this arc. Navarro leaving him another toothbrush or the same one, it's hard to tell. That's the toothbrush. That's what I'm going with. Come on, they have something real, and if she's sticking around, which I am assuming she is, given people have spotted her around town, plus Danvers' closing line, no one ever really leaves, then we deserve a little more closure to their arc. He asked Navarro to come back. Let's see her come back.
I think this brings up a good point too about the ending for Navarro. So maybe we can bridge that conversation.
That was one of my biggest gripes with the finale. Not the Kavik thing. I mean, that's Kyle's gripe. But my gripe is Navarro a ghost?
I don't know.
I've
heard that theory.
I think it's a Rorschach test. I think it's intentionally a Rorschach test.
Right.
What do you see in it, and where do you want to take the story? I think that, and we've got another email too later on, a little bit more, that talks a little bit more about doing a long walk or a walkabout kind of thing, which might shed some more light on what Navarro did. For me, I think she needed to go out and reconnect and re-find herself as the person who has a new name and a new identity and a new wholeness to herself. And so for me, it wasn't that she committed suicide or died in some way, that she's a ghost, but that she's just out there. And I thought that little end scene on the deck is just sort of a filmmaker's way of saying, well, or in Inception, right? Did the top spin, is the top still spinning, or did it topple? And just to give us a little shove off into the metaphysical waters, and we can just sort of drift in whatever way we want. And I think that's another thing that a lot of people were bouncing off of, is the ambiguity, that there are certain things that are left intentionally ambiguous that we don't have specific answers to. And I think those are also intentional choices in there. And again, from an enjoyment factor, some people enjoy that and some people don't. And then the question is does it make for, did she build those in a way that made for good television? I'm not sure yet.
Yeah. I think that the reason this whole ambiguity bothered me so much was because it was revealed within Danvers. As Ron has brought up monologuing and exposition dumping, yeah, like you said, this was by far the worst offending part to me. Was this
the videotape
very odd deposition that Danvers is doing?
Oh, right.
Where she's giving cryptic answers to everything. There's no way they would let her get away with saying, well, let's just say you're not going to find her on the ice. What? What does that mean, Danvers? Did you bury her somewhere? Like, I don't know what that means. No way an investigator's letting her get away with that. Yeah. So that really bothered me. And I think that, combined with having Navarro just be like an ethereal being, perhaps living or dead, really, really did not work for me.
How did the video interview set up from season 1 strike you, Ron, especially since you just watched season 1 recently?
It definitely works better in season 1 than it does here. In season 1, it made sense because they're being interviewed because they're trying to get some insights into the case that is happening right then, and there's all these similarities to the case that happened 17 years earlier. So it made sense. If the purpose of this interview is to get her deposition as it relates to what happened with the
Hank.
McKay murder or Hank or whatever, I can't recall, like, were they asking her questions about Hank? And if so, I don't remember if they dove into it. It seems like the only part of the interview they showed was her commenting on whether or not, like, what happened to Navarro. So I get the impression Navarro left, and maybe she'll come back. But, it's only been about 5 months or so
Yeah, that's right.
since from the time all this happened to now, to the time of this interview. It didn't work for me for the same reasons John mentioned. It was weird. It was cryptic. The cut to Navarro walking out on the deck. When I immediately saw it, it didn't even occur to me that maybe she's supposed to be a ghost. After I heard some podcast episodes that made that suggestion, I thought, oh, I could see it maybe being like that. My immediate thought was, are they living together now? Like, we were never clear, like, if one of them, if they ever had a relationship with each other at some point. Excuse me. Or was she just visiting, or was she still alive and she is just only revealing herself to Danvers? I agree with you, David. I think it's kind of left up in the air. You can interpret it however you want to interpret it.
I will agree that of all the season 1 tieback stuff,
Mm-hmm.
I felt this was the most ham-fisted. This was the most sort of obviously constructed. I'm obviously constructing something, as opposed to a name that gets dropped in an information dump about the credit history of, or the, who's paying the bills kind of thing. Or oh yeah, this dude, his name was this and he died of this cancer, right? Like, oh yeah, that, oh hey, wait, that's Russ Cole. If you know season 1, that you can put those together. Cool. It's non-determinative though, right? It doesn't mean anything. It's just fun. It puts you in the same universe. Whereas this videotape deposition, I get that we wanted to have some sort of epilogue and get a sense of where things have been left, but then to just it was very clunky the way that it, whereas in season 1 it was a device that was a really important part of the device, the setup of the season, and it just felt awkward for it to be in here. It felt kind of stupidly intentional, I guess.
Yeah.
I know that we probably want Jodie Foster. If I'm writing this show, I probably want Jodie Foster to have the last words of the season. But wouldn't it have been fun to have Pete confessing everything to his wife as the thing? You know what I mean?
Right.
You know what I mean? He wasn't confessing anything to Gailey. He's like, I just need your help. And he's like, all right, it's been a few months. I'm ready to tell you. Here's how it all went down.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he did all the detective work. He should have had the opportunity to spill the beans.
And my God, is he good at cleaning?
Yeah.
Should open up a
oh my
side hustle.
gosh. Yes. It's amazing how a Swifty mop can be effective in cleaning up gallons of blood. It's interesting, David, that you felt like this was the most ham-fisted. Maybe in how they did it. I actually feel like all the other illusions felt more ham-fisted. Like this.
Interesting. Okay.
Because I feel like this deposition is something in the context of a case like this makes sense. So
Sure, I get
whereas
that.
I feel like the execution of it is not great, the fact that they had it, I think, makes perfect sense.
Agreed.
The other things that were allusions to to season 1, I mean, were the ones that, especially time is a flat circle, or
Right.
how we like,
right. Yeah.
like why, like
When Clark says
what's
that.
the point of dropping that in? In fact, when I heard it, I was trying to remember, was that from season 1? I think they just dropped. I was trying to remember if I had heard it from like an earlier episode of this season, or if it was because I literally had just finished watching the finale of season 1 when I watched the finale of season 1 the same day I watched the finale of this season.
Oh wow. Okay.
So I was trying to remember.
Yeah, it
I
was
knew
all
I
a
heard
blur.
this earlier today. Was it from which season was from? So, but I wanted to address Kyle's thing about Kavik. And I kind of feel like I too was disappointed they didn't come together, but I actually felt like that was emotionally real. She's not ready to be in a relationship with someone who is as healthy as Kavik. I think if she got back together with Kavik, it would have it would have been bad for him. He seems
Right.
to be a lot more emotionally mature than she is right now. Not that she's emotionally immature, but she needs some personal processing. She needs some therapy work. She needs a good better help subscription for 6 months or whatever. I don't know if they're I don't know if they're
No,
they're a
we're not
sponsor,
sponsored.
No, we don't. We don't do better help.
but she needs something like that in order to process a lot of her stuff before she's ready to be in any kind of serious relationship. So, now we don't know if she's going to get that based on how it ended, but I think I was fine from an emotional story standpoint that she did not get back together with Kavik, and I think
Mm.
it was probably an emotionally mature thing for her to do, not to go back together with him if she knows that she's not ready for that.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think our storybook fairy tale does, you know, are we're used to that and we want to see that coming together. And I really do want them to end up, but I also agree that she's got some things that she needs to do for herself before she can come back as an equal partner to Kavik, because Kavik is a man who is ready to be equal with somebody.
Yeah, he's a good dude.
Totally.
He's gonna
Well,
make some woman happy one day.
yeah,
I just know
yeah.
I
Of
remember
the 5 women left in this town, yes.
it. Right.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that we'll see enough of them in the Ghost remake. But for now, David, let's do the tongue discussion. I
All
think
right.
we're ready for it.
It's time. It's time. This is the one that, you know, seems to be, it's a kind of a tip of the iceberg, topic, because it touches on so many other things, about voicing, about ambiguity, about, you know, the murder mystery itself. So I compiled several comments from that we got all into sort of one group discussion, and we can sort of break it down as we go through. So first up is Peter O.H., our old friend and lore master. And Peter says, I was pondering what might explain Annie K's tongue showing up at the lab. Her corpse lack of tongue seemed to be taken as a warning to others to think carefully before they speak out against the mind. It does not seem like a huge leap to assume that Hank Pryor was the one who removed the tongue. So let's pause there really quick.
I would buy that. I
Okay.
would buy that.
Ron, are
Yeah.
you?
You know, I agree with that.
Okay.
That he's the one who removed it.
So then Peter continues, but then 6 years later, it shows up at the lab crime scene almost as if to say Annie K will not be silenced. But who would have done that? Perhaps Hank, but that doesn't really track. Another possible explanation is that Clark or another scientist kept the tongue, but why would they do that? It makes no sense.
Also, Clark was really confused when she asked about the tongue. He's like, I don't know anything about that.
Right. So Peter concludes, if you buy into the tongue symbolizing Annie's voice, then the vengeful women would be suspects in leaving the tongue at the lab. But it is an unnecessary loose end that might lead back to them. And then you have to assume the women somehow removed the tongue 6 years ago for the purpose of keeping it in the first place. The woman also denied doing this, but of course they would if they were worried about anything leading back to them. But right now, I think this is the most logical explanation. So it's like there's no clear, mundane answer, right?
Mm-hmm. I want to know, how is that tongue preserved for 6 years?
I mean, it's pretty cold out there.
There's no answer.
Some
The only thing
permafrost.
the only thing that we have is Danvers saying to Navarro that there's some weird cellular damage that is possibly related to freezing,
Mm-hmm.
but we never have a definitive answer on it. So then I think a lot of the internet detectives went sideways into it has to do with the microbe and what the Solal research was up to, and it's preserved, and maybe Annie is really alive and she's some sort of zombie monster that's going to come eat all of our faces.
Yeah, next week on The Last of Us. Yep.
Right.
Exactly. We're gonna Michonne and Rick are going to show up in Alaska.
It starts growing tendrils and crawling.
Right. Or The Last of Us, Night Country, The Last of Us. I don't know how to put those two shows together. But then Al Chalant, a good friend of ours, who we've got another email from him later when we get back around to stuff, says, Hank also doesn't make sense. He moved her body, but the tongue was found by the delivery man before the cops came for the investigations, and he wouldn't have had a method to preserve it. I had a suspicion that the scientists took it for research purposes on the microorganism at one point, maybe if she had come in contact with it like a patient zero type thing, but this doesn't make sense now either. Seeing the murder scene. Total mystery here, unless I'm missing something. Being the first piece of physical evidence that originally links the two cases seems like a big oversight not to get a solid answer. But it seems the researchers were behind it somehow since it was preserved for years. And man, if it was the sandwich guy, WTF, says Al Chalant. And then I think we'll wrap it around here with Duv's. I plucked this from Duve wrote in a much bigger email as well. He says, for me, the show had done a decent job of painting Clark as an already a bit of a flaky character before the incident at Solal Station. He struck me as someone who was emotionally fragile, and the reveal that he was not just a bystander to Annie K's murder, but actually delivered the coup de grace led me to think that he had a total breakdown after the murder. So here's Duve's headcanon. At some point after the killing, Clark removes Annie's tongue, and this plays a part in the veneration of Annie in the building of the shrines, the one we see in the caravan and the one that we see in the subterranean ice lab. The tongue was a relic of Annie and venerated by Clark. In the aftermath of the Solal incident, exhausted, emotionally and mentally altered by his own guilt over Annie, Clark, in a fugue state, takes the relic and places it in the station, a totally subconscious admission of his own guilt, in that the placement of the tongue is the key link to connect Annie K's murder to the Solal incident, and helps to expose the connection between the scientists in the mine and ultimately how Annie K died. So that's a big, big piece of headcanon.
Dube's getting hired by Issa Lopez for season 5.
Seriously. And I have to say, Duve sent in a really big email. We'll get to some of his stuff later, but I've actually asked him to write it up as a blog post and we can actually publish it on our website because he's got some really good stuff to say about walkabouts and long walks and those kinds of things. So, cool. Tongue, where do you guys fall out on this? John, what do you think? Is it is it answerable or unanswerable? And if it's unanswerable, is that dissatisfying?
I think it is dissatisfying if it's unanswerable. I think it was meant to be unanswerable, but if I'm going to pick a headcanon, I like the idea that Clark is an unreliable narrator, and perhaps he did it.
Got it.
I think Duve's on the nose with that one.
And what did he say was the reason why Clark would have done it?
Kind of a Edgar Allan Poe guilt kind of thing, right? A tapping. He saved it because he loved her, and then he kept it in a shrine as a relic in a reliquary. And then at some point he sort of got rid of it, in a fugue state or out of guilty consciousness or whatever. And then that leaves the clue for.
And who would have cut it out? He would have cut it out? Is that
maybe? I don't think I don't think the listener says that in their email, but that's maybe what I'm assuming. That maybe he. Yeah.
Why? Why would Clark do this?
Exactly. There's no answer.
There's no way he would cut out the person. He seemed to have really loved her.
But he also did the whole, I would never hurt her, as we had a flashback of him smothering her.
Were you the one, were you complaining about the fact that he did that, John? I think I heard you on the season finale.
I like that he was so, what am I trying to say? He was kind of cognitively dissonant there, right? He's like, I would never hurt her. But he was the one who struck the final blow.
Yeah, I disagree with you on that one. I remember listening to you and David talking about it because she had just been stabbed 32 times.
Mm-hmm.
she had to be in pain. She was definitely going to die. I think it. I think it was in essence. Now, whether or not he's justified in doing this, I think from his mindset, it was a mercy killing. He
Mm,
wasn't trying to hurt her. I think he really felt like he was trying to help her. I mean, she had to have been in agony. They obviously were not going to take her to a hospital, so she had a choice. Does she die by bleeding out from 32 stab wounds, or can he put her out of her misery quickly? I think about the scene in Game of Thrones where um, the scene
Daenerys
where
with
that one dude was about to be
Khal
burned at
Drogo.
this. No, the scene where the one dude was gonna be burned. Well, that too. Yeah, that's a good example too. Maybe that's even a better one. But I was thinking of the one where the guy was being burned at the stake and John kills him with the arrow, so he doesn't have to be burnt alive.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It was one of the later seasons. So but like you said, the Drogo one where um, Daenerys kills Drogo when he's catatonic, and so I feel like um, that's the impression that I got from it personally.
So I think it's an interesting thing that Lopez does in putting Clark in that position, because it is he's trying to ease her into the transition of death, right? But then she's fighting him, and he's like, stop. And then there's something else that comes in as well, which is his own anger at her for destroying the samples, because he's a committed scientist. And I think this is another interesting avenue that the show opens up, which is these are scientists who are telling themselves that they're doing good for the world, that they're going to solve, they're going to cure cancer, they're going to do all these wonderful miracle things, but at what cost? And the
Oh,
ultimate cost, they're poisoning a community. They're stopping the lives of children who will never be able to live and experience life, depriving parents. There's so much stuff about missing parents in this season as well. Nobody has a mom or dad. Nobody's got a functional family in this season.
I mean,
That
what could go wrong with means and logic? I mean, nothing has
exactly.
ever been bad about that.
And what makes a good bad guy in our storytelling, and that we like. I mean, if we go to again to an end game, to a Thanos
Yeah, it's the
thing,
5 Infinity Stones actually that do it.
that we want, that Thanos was an interesting bad guy because he had a point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just mustache twirling, but it was actual, like, no, I'm trying to actually solve a problem. I'm actually trying to do something good for the universe. So these scientists are trying to do something good for society. And
Right.
and Clark says that at the end, like, he's like, as he's smothering her, I forget the exact words, but he's basically saying to the effect that, like, you can see his anger that she destroyed his work. So he's mad at her at the same time that he's trying to, put her out of her misery. So it's a really complex moral situation. So it's all wrapped up in there. But I love this aspect of the scientists and their hubris. Oh, but we're doing good. But are you really? And who's really going to get the benefit of that medicine that
Mm-hmm.
you've discovered? Right? Are
Yeah.
you actually going to give it to us for? Are you going to actually, share it with the world, or are the Tuttles just going to keep it for themselves?
It's actually part of their cruise package now. You can't get it unless you attend one of the Tuttle cruises.
the scientists was another frustration I had with the show for two reasons. One, I trying to buy the fact that men of science would turn into bloodthirsty murderers. Like, they just snapped and turned. They turned just to go off, like, and all of them, like, all of them to go off, and then even the idea that they were purposefully poisoning this community, even if it was for the betterment of the world. Scientists just don't do anything like that, and you know I think um the analogy of Thanos we got to know Thanos over a number of movies, so we got to understand his worldview or
Right.
his universe view, if you will, and so we could understand why he would do that. I think the same thing for like Killmonger in Black Panther. We could understand. He made some good points. Like I can understand why he's doing what he's doing. We don't get to know these scientists, so then we have
Mm-hmm.
to make this leap of logic that 8 men of science would be, one, willing to poison an entire community, and two, be willing to become, bloodthirsty killers because of this person. Yes, even though they may be devastated, I could see maybe one person going crazy and like hitting her with something, and maybe that kills her. But to get to the point where you all take
Gang
turns stabbing.
attack.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was just too much. And I would have need to have seen something that laid the groundwork for these scientists having the capacity to be like that. Something that established that they were either mad or crazy, or maybe one of them was kind of off the deep end, and that's the person who does it. But again, to have all 8 of them. So for me personally, the scientists turning into, you know,
The monster.
turning
Well,
into
In the case.
monsters the way they did. And I think, and they weren't really villains. Like a good villain is someone who you're following throughout the season. And it was almost like the villain of the season was the ghost in a sense, who
mm,
Mhm.
who may or may not have been real. Like we weren't really following
right.
these scientists as a villain per se. So
The
I,
scientists were almost singular. They were mono-dimensional. They weren't
yes,
they weren't
Yeah.
multifaceted like everyone else was, and so they were
right.
just a caricature of evil. And I think again, I'm going to go back to the sin of 6 episodes. We didn't get any. We got
Mm-hmm.
barely anything with the scientists. So, like you say, I don't have anything to really connect myself to them to then
Correct.
feel their heel turn or what have you. There are little drops of, oh, they really kept to themselves, they don't rotate staff, blah blah blah, so they're somehow exceptional, they're different, but yeah, there's not enough depth there, there's not enough there for us to really.
Yeah. And you probably could have done it in one episode, maybe, or
Sure.
two.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's an argument to be made for the banality of evil kind of thing. Of we all have the capacity for monstrous acts, and
Joel was a monster.
I'm going to ignore that one. Um, and we all have the capacity for great and kind acts, and we all have the capacity for monstrous acts. It's our choices to define who we are. And I mean, how many people have done things in war that they
Sure.
would find morally reprehensible under normal circumstances, but they feel like it's for a greater cause, so they do it anyway.
Right.
And that's a big moral debate, right? Uh, Look at Nazi scientists
Yeah,
trying to
absolutely.
get cures for different diseases through human experimentation, doing truly evil things. And I think there are people who are both intelligent and able to, we're really good as humans at holding cognitive dissonances. And I think it's very possible that these people got themselves to a point where they said it's impossible for us to ever get through this permafrost unless we do this awful thing to this community. And so to save the world in their eyes, I'm not, that's not my view, but to save the world in their eyes, they have to lead to a few stillbirths in the community. And that's a price they're willing to pay.
Which opens up the whole conversation of the trolley problem, right? One versus many. And I
Well,
think
the trolley
somebody
problem doesn't count if you're driving the train, right?
not from that point of view. We're not
The trolley
examining it from
problem
that point.
requires you to be at the turnstile and
Right, to
redirecting a
save.
force that's already in motion. If you're driving the train, you are the problem.
That's a good point. Somebody brought up on our Spotify comments as well about this issue as it related to Operation Paperclip, which is when the United States started bringing in German scientists from World War II and incorporating them into our rocketry and nuclear programs. And again, these moral questions questions of what do we do as society and as an institutions, ethical research, how do we absorb, how do we move forward. So this is where I get into the show is tapping into a lot of different interesting concepts overall in all kinds of different places in the show, in the plot.
What if they had something, again, as we do our back seat rewriting of the show?
Yes, exactly.
What if they had a scene where they established that these scientists were Nazis, like real Nazis, or they established that these scientists were part of a known group that hated indigenous people? Something that made it clear, that would make it clear in a scene or shorter, that would give us understanding of why they would have no problem doing this to an indigenous community.
This is where I kept waiting for the Tuttle references to come into play. That the Tuttles, so where I would rewrite it is that the Tuttles, there was a scientific discovery. Lund was out fundraising, trying to shake the money trees, came across the Tuttles, and the Tuttles were like, oh, it could give us immortality. It could give us, longevity on a scale unbeknownst to, humanity. Yeah, we're in. We want to fund that. We want to do it for all of our evil, nefarious reasons. Here's a pile of cash, and we're going to stay really connected to you. And so that they were the ones that were going to derive the initial benefit of the Salal research. That's my rewrite.
Yeah.
And then the men of science are just motivated by science. Well, I must discover it, right? I must be, I'm the only one who can discover this. And so this hubris, right? This ego and hubris.
Yeah, but I almost think it's more interesting and more human to have them go, to not have them have an outward, not that they don't have an implicit, but not have an outward bias towards this community, but instead just be like, well, my cause is more important than the few human lives around me. Like it's a callousness, it's a banality of evil.
Yeah.
Which is, in Andor, Karn is having cereal with his mom, but he can also commit atrocities, right? Like these guys are watching Twist and Shout, and they could also murder
drinking
a woman.
Lone Star beer.
They're not mutually exclusive, right? We all have that capacity.
Yeah. And I think for me, I just would have need to have seen that character development to buy that.
100% agree.
Yeah.
100%.
No, because I agree with you, John. I think that would have, and in some ways that could have been more interesting, but I would have just need to see them develop in that.
Yeah, I hear you. So Al Shalant wrote in and said, enjoyed the show, and overall, although I'm bumping on a few things since I look at Mystery Crime Show very closely. Well, the white noise machine was blocking the spookies for Liz. In episode 6, the blacked out Salal station, the spookies start to creep in for her too when she takes a nap without her white noise machine. Okay. All right.
I like this idea.
Mm-hmm.
I think the whole time, Holden is one of those ghosts who, what did Rose say? The 3 different kinds of ghosts.
They want to say hi, right? Or they want to tell you something.
Yeah, it's the one that wants to say hi. And Holden's trying to reach out to her to heal her, right? He doesn't want his mommy to be in pain anymore. So the polar bear is a symbol of a guardian spirit for Inupiaq people. And so the polar bear is a manifestation of Holden, and Twist and Shout and all of these other things. And Liz is drinking, sexing, and working everyone around her to block out all of that. And I think the white noise is, I don't know if Lopez intentionally put that in there, but I think it works perfectly. If she did, it's great. Is that is her absolutely pushing back against the spirit world and trying to not listen. So I like this take a lot.
And if you're looking for a white noise machine, consider a pink noise machine, because that's more shaped to the human ear. White noise is all frequencies equal, and pink noise is like soothing to the human ear. Anyway,
you learn something every day.
That's from my audio background.
Come to the podcast, come for the podcast, stay for the audio engineering lessons.
Right.
I will assume with confidence the native women track down and kill the engineer Oliver Tagak also. Spiral left behind and his clothes left folded. Seems they did this after the investigation uncovered his location. But how did they find out where he was? They got eyes everywhere.
Hard disagree. I think Tagak just went out on the ice and just went outside the confines of traditional, not traditional, but
He's
of
still running.
outside of the urban, structures. I think he went back to being living closer to the land, further away from developments and settlements. So,
All right. Or he
Ron,
was a
a
ghost
thought?
all along.
No thoughts on that one. Was he one of the original scientists?
He
Is
was
it
the equipment engineer
Oh,
at
okay.
Saul Station that they went to his shack.
Right. No, I remember
Yeah.
Yeah.
him going. I remember them going to the shack, but I couldn't remember what was his connection to Salal.
He was the equipment guy. He
Oh.
was the guy that like kept the
Right.
generators running and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think he left, like 2 years prior? It was after Annie K's death, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the question is, did he suspect or know anything about Annie K? I think that is a better question.
I kind of feel like he probably had something. Like, why was he so standoffish when they came
Yeah.
for him?
Yeah.
Just the way he was reacting to them when they came to talk suggests either that he knew something or that's the feeling I got when they had that interaction. And then he kind of disappears.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, he could have been freaked out by the whole "all your friends are dead" thing, but I don't know.
I would not wonder too. I would also wonder how much he knew and or suspected what the mine was actually doing. And so if
I
there's
just
not
had to
some,
resist my Gimli impression so hard.
they call it a mine. So yeah, who knows what he knew or didn't know, and how that played out in his guilt or wanting to avoid the law, right? The institution of the police.
Yeah. What was the noise the cave mapping team heard 30 years ago that resulted in a similar incident to the Salal men? Unsolved. Good question. Any thoughts?
The noise. What noise is he referring to?
The thing that got I can't
Heiss.
ever remember his name. Yeah, Heiss out there, and Heiss surviving the similar incident.
So Heiss had similar injuries, and then when Danvers is interrogating or questioning him,
right.
He's like, yeah, I heard all the men heard a weird noise. They went out on the ice, and then I blacked out and woke up in the hospital with my injuries.
Oh, couldn't it have been the women who came?
But that was 30 years prior. So like, it was not even. Yeah, it was.
He could have been there.
So I mean,
not a lot of them though.
This goes into the question of ambiguity and Lopez intentionally leaving certain things open. It's clearly the answer is Sedna, in my opinion.
Right.
So, but of course, we don't have any evidence of Sedna other than a tongue. So.
Right. And the fact that I guess the guys didn't come back, but that could also have just been like, again, a weather event, right?
A slab avalanche.
Yeah. I mean, two things could be true. They could have been killed by the avalanche, and they would not have been out there but for the Inupiaq women.
So, this comes up later, I think, in another email, but the question of justice and, was this murder?
Oh, it absolutely was.
Yeah.
You send people out to the elements.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's murder. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's debating that. I think we're calling it a justified murder, but it's still a murder.
Yeah.
For sure. All right. The video of Annie on her phone doesn't seem to quite match up with what's being shown in episode 6. The video shows her discovering the lab and being very quiet and hushed. But now we see she had just completed destroying the lab. So why hush hush after causing all that noise, tossing around ice cores and lab equipment? She starts the video saying, "I found it." Then we hear the hatch open, and she seems to move to hide and continues, "I found it. My name is Annie Kotick. If anything happens," screams of terror. But she starts the video hushed even before the hatch opens. It's strange. We see the phone recording stopped behind because Clark stepped on the phone. It seems like he got from his bed down to the secret lab very quickly based on the video length. No way someone even in peak physical condition can go from sleeping to down that hallway to down that ladder in less than 10 seconds to line up with the video evidence.
So my thought on this is that it's just filmmakers cutting corners here. I think it's just,
Yeah.
I can't read anything into it other than, oh, the plot doesn't quite work, so we're just going to mash it together and call it good. That's my 2 cents.
I'm chalking up to continuity errors. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ron?
No, I was going to agree.
Okay.
For sure.
Rip team, but I got
It's
a wild.
It's Rose Ghost. It's the Rose.
Rip team Rose Ghost.
He uses little emojis in
It's
there.
the emoji.
Yeah.
I think it's rest in peace.
Yeah. Rest in peace. Leave it in. Rest in peace, Team Rose Ghost. But I got a wild headcanon to spin out here still about Rose. It seems some
just a quick, just to hang something quick. Last episode, Al Chalant was positing that Rose was a ghost and not actually real. So that's the context for this comment. Yeah, because nobody but Navarro talks to her
until episode 6.
Episode 6, when Navarro, or to the very end of episode 5, when Navarro says to Pete, go to Rose and do that. Otherwise, Rose doesn't interact with anybody but Navarro. So Al Chalant was spinning this theory that she was a ghost, and we were like, "Ooh, that's cool. That's interesting." Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, it seems some story with Rose was missing or changed. It just seems so strange, everything surrounding this character. I think many came up with the Rose ghost theory because of filming. It seems like she filmed her scenes separately. That's not her real name in episode 4 and the interactions with Pete in episode 6 makes me think, was she at one point supposed to be Pete's mom? I'm thinking this because of a specific quote from Finn, the actor who plays Pete on a podcast when asked what to pay attention to in the show. He said to pay attention to people's relationships to each other. We know his mom walked out on the family years before without much more info. We know Hank is a bad person and a bad cop. Pete is a good person and a great investigator. Is Rose perhaps Pete's mother? Hold my beer, who had an affair with Travis Cole, and their son is Pete, and she left Pete with Hank to run away into the wilderness? I think I cracked the case. He's Russ' brother.
Oh my gosh. Can you imagine if that was the case?
Season 1 bros would be losing.
I was just going to say
that. Okay.
All right.
No, that's all I'm going to say. No. The Psycho Obsessive Shrine with the stuffed doll and all that crazy Carcosa shit seems like an oversight. Clark must have been really crazy and haunted to do this. Why the doll on the bed? Was that supposed to be a cuddle pillow after the real girl died? Was he crazy enough to think that he was trying to resurrect her or something? With all the cult stuff hanging around the trailer? This is still very bizarre compared to how the guy acted in the final episode. He was probably a lot more unhinged given the contents of the fuck trailer. Boy, a lot of interesting terminology in this email to Al Chalant.
Al Chalant was having a good time writing this email out.
Al was the one with the wild theory last week that had us rolling, right?
Yeah.
Al, keep it coming in.
Yeah, for sure. Keep it fresh. Keep it hot and fresh. I am really disappointed that none of the trailer stuff, none of the Clark crazy shriney stuff, it
made no sense.
Yeah, it was just so flash and then gone. And we didn't even get in the ice cave in the secret underground laboratory. There's a brief scene of it and then it's gone. And that was some of the great stuff about season 1 was all of the creepy factor that stuff brought into it.
Yeah. And I feel like that scene in this season, the whole purpose again was to make some connection, because the trailer had the spiral, it had all the weird wiki models similar to season 1. It was almost like the Civil War fort scene in the finale of season 1. This was the trailer was almost like a version of that.
Right.
But again, we hadn't established that there was this type of mindset that Clark had. Other than all we knew is that he was disappeared. We didn't know he was the kind of person that created these little things, left them around. So I felt like that whole scene, like, did it contribute anything to the story? Like, did they discover anything from that helped them do more detective work? No, there was no connection.
I think the thing that the trailer got them was the hairdresser.
Mm,
because they got photographs,
Hmm.
and then they asked the question, "Who took the photograph?"
right. But you
And
didn't need all the wicker stuff in order to get
to
that.
get that
Yeah.
exactly,
Right.
yeah,
So
Very weird. Very weird.
it makes me
Um,
wonder, like how much of this would not have been in the show if it was just Night Country and not True Detective Night Country. Like,
hmm,
would
agreed.
this have been a scene? Like, I doubt it.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Right. It feels like this is injected. This is added in. This is an additive element to connect it to the season 1 world. Yeah.
Right.
Got it.
Interesting. David, you want to lead us into Bettina W?
Sure. Bettina W., lore master and friend of the pod. She says, "Did I miss something, or was there absolutely no point to Lund being alive? I guess this was only played for horror and the supernatural of it all? Question mark. If that's the case, then the construction of the scene where he sits up and talks to Navarro still bothers me. We see him sitting up while Navarro is still looking the other direction. If he was one of Navarro's ghosts, we definitely need her to see the thing happening. Otherwise, it's us seeing the ghosts." So, yeah, good point about Lund. And I think it goes back, Ron, to your point about Saul scientists, we barely knew ye.
Hmm.
Right. No, I agree. I think the only point that Lund sitting up serves is to feed into the narrative that Navarro is seeing stuff.
Right.
That's really
Yeah.
all he does. Like the fact that he survives just for no other purpose than deliver that, because shortly after that, he dies. So again, from a story perspective, it's a device used to add a creepy factor, because if I'm remembering it right, doesn't he like sit up in a kind of creepy way in the background?
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
And
He also
then
screams when they find him alive in the
When they break his
in
arm
Right.
off.
the corpsicle.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's he's there to offer these jump screams or these jump scares, these freaky encounters that add to the supernatural element, and it ultimately doesn't go anywhere.
Hmm.
I will say that it was of all the visitations of all of the ghostly supernatural things, it was one of my favorites. Him sitting up really
Mhm.
creeped me out. It was, and the makeup on him was great. So
Yeah.
very effective. All right. Bettina continues. What was the point of Tagak? Danvers and Navarro never got any important information from him, right? I might be forgetting something here, but I kind of have the feeling that the story would have been exactly the same if he wasn't in it. I heard somebody say that he might have been the one driving the truck for the native women that came for Salal, but I thought Tagak looked generally shocked when Liz and Ave told him that that his ex colleagues were dead.
Yeah, I doubt that. That's not. Yeah, he was
I,
not driving.
no, and I kind of agree with her on that point. What
Yeah.
purpose did he play? The spiral thing didn't really. I mean, the stone. They got the stone from him after he fled, and then Kavik got the stone, and then Billy or whatever his bartending buddy had an answer to it, and then they told her that in the laundromat. So it was very busy roundabout sort of way to get that answer. And then
Mhm.
the answer was just like, oh, it's a warning for ice, unstable ice. Oh, wait a minute, what? Like it's painted everywhere. It's like been built up. It's this whole thing. So like, where's the through line? Why did Annie have it tattooed on her body? Why was she having dreams about it when she was in high school and got a tattoo? Like, so
Hmm.
there's just some pieces missing from the continuity, right?
And I think this contributes to what I was saying earlier about all these storylines and these main points that I kind of brought up, and like all of these tendrils that don't go anywhere. Like I I don't ever see myself revisiting the season, like rewatching it.
Okay.
Um, just because the, again, because of the mystery issue that I mentioned earlier, and because it has all these pieces that in and of themselves are interesting, but they don't go anywhere. Lund didn't go anywhere. The Wicker dolls didn't go anywhere. The spirals really didn't go anywhere. They were just kind of thrown in there either to have some type of fabricated connection to season one or to add some spook factor to it. And it didn't really contribute to the main mystery of what was going on. And so like these points that the feedback is bringing up, I think kind of all contributes to that. It's one of
Yeah,
my
and I
issues with
guess
the season.
there could have been more of that time spent on character development, right? Like you say,
Totally.
show us more about Salal, show us more about NEK. I mean, the scene where she's giving birth to everybody, or to the one child, not to everybody in the world,
Right.
was really great. And that really showed me like what a treasure she was to this community and how vital she was to the healthcare of this community.
Yeah.
But I could have used more of that. I could have used more of her. I could have used more of Salal. I could have used more of a lot of people.
So I'm going to paraphrase Bettina's email here and skip a little bit because we're going to, the next email from Mule's Bane is going to cover it. But one last little critique that she has, the orange peel spiral really made my eyes roll really hard. And looking back on the whole season, I wish they hadn't done any of the season 1 callbacks. They didn't do anything for the story, never went anywhere. And as a consequence, made the world feel really weirdly small. It was as if Issa Lopez was just fucking with season 1 producers. Fine. But as a viewer, I usually don't like to be jerked around like that. I can take a little, but that was a lot. I kind of agree. I think, maybe the Rust Coal thing and the Tuttle thing, and then that would have been enough. I don't know. We needed to go further and further into it. Ron, you just did season 1. So how are you feeling about the cross season connectivity? John hasn't seen season 1 at all. So
yeah, not at all.
Oh, in terms of like how
was it too much? Was the orange peel too much? Was the rust?
Yeah.
Was the salal?
It was all too much. Honestly, they didn't. I don't know why they had to make any kind of connection to season 1. To be honestly, like
season 2 has no connection to season 1, and season 3, I think there's one phrase one reference to season 1.
Right. I mean, if they left it at a vague connection to Travis being Cole's dad and left it at that I think that would have been enough. That would have, because it's established that his dad was in Alaska.
Yeah.
We could have made that would have been enough. Like that's enough spice. That's enough season 1 spice. But they piled so much season 1 stuff on top of it with the spiral and then the wicker dolls.
Yep,
and
exactly.
Then, and then the recurring references to Travis. That and then of course the time is a flat circle.
Yeah,
like,
right. I forgot
all
about
these
that
drops.
Yeah,
there was no reason to do that. Like it didn't really serve the story. It didn't go anywhere. It didn't need to be connected in that sense. It started raising questions.
Yeah,
that
too much
you didn't need
highlighting too much.
Right, because people started looking. Are the Tuttles going to come back? Is there going to be something? Are we going to learn something that we didn't learn? And so you almost start creating this anticipation or an expectation of a greater season 1 connection that never materialized. And so it was like, what is the point? It would have been cool to have that one reference with Travis and leave it at that.
Agreed.
And that would, that's a cool. That's kind of like how they did it with Fargo. Like usually, like one character was like maybe the son of somebody from a previous season.
Right.
And that's the closest connections you will get between seasons. It doesn't really go deep into dropping all of these hints of connecting, the 2 seasons, and especially, and the times that they did do it in Fargo, it kind of, it gives you some additional insight into the particular character when you realize, oh, that's that's the son from season 4 or whatever. That kind of makes more sense when you look at those characters in retrospect. Whereas here, I don't get any additional insight into Cole having watched this season, and I don't think Cole's story gives any additional insight into Navarro or Rose either.
Yeah. All right.
I'm going to summarize the last bit of Bettina's email so that we can keep moving on. But she has a whole paragraph about the whole message of taking justice into your own hands and how that can be problematic. And I think that opens up that conversation of law versus justice, of vigilantism versus, institutions. And in this case, the institutions are failed or captured. Whereas these are vigilantes and they executed a form of justice by putting these men out to their death. And so I think that's problematic. I mean, we can all go raw, the antis did it for themselves because the society was failing them, but that can lead to some bad outcomes down the road. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think in the as a television show where you want to root for the underdog, we can watch the show knowing that it's make believe and cheer for the women. But if this was in real life, like I would have different thoughts about it. Like you can't
Point eight men out to
Right.
gunpoint
Right.
onto the
right,
ice.
right. Like maybe if it had brought them to justice, like if they're the ones who brought
Right.
them to justice. And I mean, who knows? Again, we can do our backseat rewriting of how it could have worked. But like, it's. I think this is a case where I can't really justify this type of justice being taken into their own hands, as opposed to if there was a way to have done it where they could have been the ones to bring these men to justice and
Right.
stop it
Caused.
without having to also become monsters themselves. And
Right.
maybe monsters is too strong a word, but become killers and murderers themselves in order to have it done.
I think this opens up an interesting commentary too about Navarro and Danvers, where Danvers is the face of the institution. Navarro is the face of justice,
Hmm.
right? Pouring the liquor in the guy's gas tank, that's not legal, right? That's criminal mischief. But it's a kind of justice because that guy's a domestic abuser, right? And we don't want to see we would not feel bad if bad things happen to him, intentionally or otherwise. And so this idea that the uniform, Navarro wears the uniform as a means of expression of her sense of justice, and there needs to be people out in the world being guardians and protectors of people, a kind of a big sister, where Liz is, she puts on the uniform because she believes in the law. She believes in the structure. She reads the policy to her chief, right? She's like, well, you need 48 hours or whatever it is to let these things thaw. She knows chapter and verse. She's an institutionalist in that sense.
Yeah, and they touch on this in season one as well, in a sense of because Cole uses some dirty means in order to get some information
Yeah.
out of some people. So he definitely is one to um, bend the law, so to speak.
Yeah.
He never went so far, to my knowledge, of actually killing anyone.
But
To
Marty did. Well, anyway, spoilers for
Mark,
season one.
that's right.
Sorry.
Um, yeah, so that never really transpires to but and this is a case, and that's a case where those are men who have been established to be bad men
Right.
doing that, whereas here we have the women of the community doing it. And again, in the moment we can feel like we're rooting for them because of everything that has been done to them,
Nobody else is doing anything, so
and no one
they're,
else is doing anything. Right.
yeah.
Right.
So we feel good about them taking matters into their own hands. Yeah.
Right.
So thanks, Bettina. Thanks for all your feedback, and thanks for being a lore master. John, you want to cue up the next one?
Yeah, Mules Bane wrote in. Mules Bane, aka Nate T, a lore master, posted it on the Discord. And I guess, David, you're going to bring up the Lopez test at
Yeah,
some
I think
point during this.
this brings in the Lopez test into focus.
David has to quantify everything we do. He will do that. Ultimately, I think there are a few important common threads and themes that are the foundation of all the True Detective seasons, which help me resolve the loose ends and unknowns. Each season explores the complex and mysterious human relationship with experiencing life and death and the spaces between. In life, it appears that we experience things in a linear trajectory with a beginning and an end. However, many of us have deep and innate suspicions and convictions, like Navarro and Rust, that this is not all that there is. Number two, in the spaces where life and death overlap, where space and time dissolve, there can be a confluence of lightness and darkness, or good and evil. And number three, with the telling of these stories, each true detective becomes drawn to, connected with, and entangled with this phenomenon in some profound way. A true detective is witness to a dynamic transcendence where life meets death and our limited human perception of reality mingles with the limitless mystique of the unfolding universe and things much greater than ourselves. I have a response to this.
What did you say?
What was that?
What did it say?
What did you say?
That's Gollum saying, "What did you say?"
Oh, okay.
From The Lord of the Rings.
Right. I got the Gollum. I got that it was Gollum.
I was reading this and I was like, man, it's almost 10 o'clock at night and I don't know if I fully got everything there. But overall, I mean, that's really cool. I love this intersection of life and death and sort of this this inability to fully deal with it, right? I think Navarro and Danvers get there in the end with the Inupiaq women where, I mean, Jodie Foster really sells it when she gets up and she's like, we just wanted to tell you that the case is closed. And she really seems flustered there. And I thought that was a great performance and a great way to sort of demonstrate what you're making with this third point here, Mules.
Yeah, I think this goes into the whole conversation is, does this belong within the True Detective franchise? Does this fulfill? And I think that's what the Lopez test is does a particular season of television fall within the framework of its franchise, of its umbrella? Does it fall within the penumbra of of the show's overall mystique and hallmarks? And we can debate what makes a True Detective season a True Detective, and some of it's going to be a little bit objective and some of it's going to be a little subjective. But I think this season passes the Lopez test for me. I know John can't really answer that question because he hasn't seen any other seasons, and you've seen one, Ron. So I don't know where your thoughts. I mean, there's a question of, should it have been included as a True Detective? It is included in a True Detective. So is it True Detective? Like that's
Right.
the question, I think.
Yeah, I like the parameters that are kind of set here in terms of what makes True Detective. You know, if again, since I didn't see seasons 2 or 3, I can't speak to that. But if I were using season 1, which obviously is universally praised as the favorite among the 4, as the blueprint, I feel like a True Detective is a story that looks at um, death and pain and personal anguish. Um, I think will be one that looks at the past and the present. That's something based on what you said earlier, David. It seems like that's something season 3 also
Yeah, very
tied
much
into.
so. Yeah.
So themes of the past and the present. This show, this season definitely deals with that past and present. Definitely deals with personal pain, family pain, deals with murder. So I think it crosses all the T's and dots all the I's in terms of it being a True Detective show. I think for me, where it goes off the rails a little bit, which I mentioned earlier, is too many storylines, too many allusions to the supernatural. So it's fighting. Does it want to be a True Detective show?
Or does it want to be an Issa Lopez mystery horror thing? Yeah.
Right. Like, imagine if this was more of a detective show, a detective mystery that had a true supernatural bent to it. Versus, I feel like True Detective stays grounded in the real world, or should stay grounded in the real world, and maybe it can have some freaky elements, but it's not really meant or intended to be a ghost story.
Yeah.
For me personally, aside from that, I think this particular season does cover a lot of the bases of what makes something a True Detective show.
And I think for me, one element I would add, and I've talked about this on previous podcasts, is that you've got to have this duo of detectives who we examine the price they pay for being these guardians between the, the bad men being and keeping the bad men out, which is something that Rust says in one, which is, what does it cost me as a human being to be the one who's buffering all this evil? And there's a point where Peter even says to Leah, like, you don't want to get close to this corpuscle thing. You do not want that, as part of your memory, of your psychology. But yet Peter's there examining it, being very forensic about it, interesting in it. So, and he pays a cost, right? He ultimately pays a price for that in terms of the damage to his own moral, the moral harm that he does to himself, as well as the cost to his relationship with his wife and his child. I mean, it seems like that resolves, but it's still a cost. It's still a wound on their relationship. So
yeah.
Well, Ron, I know you've got to head out, so David and I will stick around to finish the last few emails. But thank you so much for being with us. It was really a pleasure to speak with you and to chat with you about this show. It was a great conversation. So, where can people find you?
Yeah, the easiest place to find me, if you just go to blurredrunner.com, BLERDRONNER, kind of like Blade Runner, but blurred, which is a black nerd, Ronner, like Ron. And all the links, there you can get links to my book, to my podcast, my socials. And I really enjoy having this conversation. I love doing this kind of stuff. Happy to come back and talk with you too again anytime. I appreciate it.
I think we want to talk about Mr. and Mrs. Smith, so we'll set some stuff up. We have you on the, what's that?
My obsession of the year so far. I love that show.
And then we got you on the our Oscars coverage, and we reached out and you said you wanted to talk about American Fiction, so we got your thoughts about that. And I know we were like, we'll have you on for a little while. It'll be like an hour and a half, and here we are.
No, actually, I think you said a couple hours. So
did I?
It's
okay.
All good. Yeah,
we have a running joke in the Lorehounds about, like, we could get this done in 90 minutes. 3 hours later, we're still podcasting.
My wife has rolled her eyes at that statement more times than I can count.
And they call it a mine.
Yeah, they call it a mine.
And they call it a mine.
A
mine.
At some point in the future, I definitely want to have some type of Lord of the Rings discussions with you too.
You want to come on a Silmarillion story? Are you Silmarillioned?
I've never read it.
Okay,
I probably
we can pick a
will.
chapter for you.
Yes,
you can
I
just
can
read one
definitely
chapter.
Because I love the Lord of the Rings.
Awesome. Yeah, we're going to have some good Rings of Power coverage. And then, of course, our favorite Tolkien scholar, Marilyn Arpakila, just launched her new podcast, Rings and Rituals. So check that out. They're going to be going episode by episode of season 1, looking at all the rituals that were in there. But then in good Lorehound fashion, they're going to roll that out. They're going to flip that inside out and examine ritual and what, like, oh, I make my coffee the same way every morning. Oh, that's a ritual, like da 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 da. So got
it.
Yeah.
Well, keep up the great work, gentlemen. This was fantastic. I appreciate it. I'm so honored that you invited me to be on, and I appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Happy to have you.
All right. So now that Ron has left us, David, would you like to tackle the rest of the feedback?
Sure. I think we've got about 4 emails left to go. We even got a couple people writing in really quick between recording takes. So that worked out for a couple of folks. But anyway, let's do it. All right. Next up is Kim M., a lore master. Kim says, "Hi, David and John. I've watched the finale twice, and I picked up more the second time through. Like when Danvers says her son was trapped in a car when he died. That's all we know about his death, right? We never get the full story on some things, and I like the mystery in that. It's as if we are eavesdropping on a conversation or peeking through a window. We only get partial bits and pieces of the story, and we have to fill in the rest." Really quick, what do you think about this here, John? I think detail-wise, yes, we have only outline sketches of what happened to Holden and Jake.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's a little disappointing, I'll say, because in some shows that works. Mm-hmm. In a mystery show, I think you need to give me the details at the end. Like that's the whole point of the show, is to find out what happened at the end.
Right. Yeah. And then, there are, well, and that goes into this whole question of ambiguity versus explicitity, I guess you could say. Where are we getting all of the details? And it's interesting. Some people are enjoying that and some people aren't. Yeah. It's nice that the showrunner and writers are treating us nicely. Like, we don't have to have huge exposition dumps. They're relating to us like, we can pick it up, we can pattern match, we can figure out the things. And I think in this show they did a nice job of creating that quote unquote voyeuristic point of view, like Kim is referring to here.
Yeah, I always think back to there's an Always Sunny episode where they try to make a sequel to Lethal Weapon.
Okay. And that would be a funny episode to watch.
And they have this line where he goes, "See, I'm succeeding with the object I failed with at the beginning of the movie." And I was like, and the other character goes, "Okay, we get it, we know." And I'm like, that's what I always think about with the over exposition kind of thing.
All right, Kim continues. Navarro seems a little more unhinged, like the culmination of everything finally caught up with her. I want to believe that was really her standing on the deck in the end. But if not, she's probably one badass ghost. She'll hunt the crap out of anyone that messes with the town again. Quickly on this, what's your headcanon for that? I can't remember what our prior conversation was with Ron. Did you have a point of view?
I think that was a bad mistake of the show to not make clear if she was a ghost or not.
Interesting.
Because it muddies the message that you're trying to give with her. But I refuse to take a stance because they have not given me enough information.
Got it. My personal headcanon is that she's alive and she's doing the thing like David Carradine did in Kung Fu, just walking the earth and doing stuff, bringing justice to the people.
It doesn't work very well in 2024, though, does it?
Not in the same way, but that's sort of what my Gen X brain goes to. Kim wraps up, Night Country is my new favorite True Detective, and I loved, capital L, the first season. Issa Lopez is on my radar now. I'm looking forward to whatever she does next. Same goes for Callie Reese and Finn Bennett, both new to me. Looking forward to whatever y'all are doing next as well. Appreciate you both. Best, Kim M. Kim, we appreciate you. Thanks for being a lore master. I am definitely going to keep my eyes on Issa Lopez, especially now that we know that she's going to have the keys to the True Detective franchise for maybe a couple of seasons. We'll see. But she also has an overall deal with HBO. So that means that she'll probably be able to get to start, to produce some other stuff that she wants to do for fun as well.
I've been thinking since we last recorded with Ron about, it's funny because people are listening to this minutes after, but this is like a week after for us. But I was thinking about what he said, it's hampered by the True Detective brand.
Sure.
And I think that's right. Like, I'm actually more excited to see what Issa Lopez does without the True Detective brand than with it.
Interesting. Okay. And I said this before at the beginning, and you were giving me a little side eye about this, but whether Lopez is a director who falls into the same category as Fargo is Noah Hawley.
Yeah.
And then who was the other one that I was thinking of who did oh boy, my brain is really mushy this morning.
Was it David Goyer maybe?
No. It was Mr. Robot.
Well, I don't know.
Mr.
Yeah. Lost. Are you talking about?
No.
Same about Damon Lindelof?
No.
Damon Lindelof is another guy who I follow everything he does. And
yeah.
I want to, follow what he does.
Sam Esmail.
Okay. I don't even know who that is.
So yeah, Sam Esmail, who did Mr. Robot and Leave the World Behind. These are a couple of directors that I feel have a really good hand in being able to address or to make social commentary, to address those difficult topics, but then fold them in. It's kind of like, I don't know, my brain goes to folding in egg whites. You've got to be careful in how you do it, so that you don't collapse it, but it, keeps the egg white structure, which is, what you want. And so they're able to talk about current social issues without collapsing them while folding in really cool story, and telling interesting stories. And I hope, I guess I should say it this way. My hope is that Lopez is that kind of director and that we're going to see that more of those kinds of productions from her.
Sure. I think hope is fair. Hope
Yeah,
is fair.
yeah.
I don't think I'm there on like branding her as that right now.
Sure.
After seeing this one season of television, I think she has a lot of potential. I think, this was, she did a much better job than I could have done. You know what I mean? We're just two guys just sitting here
Exactly,
farting
with
into our microphones. But, I just mean, if I'm going to compare to the people I know who like really run a tight ship,
Yeah.
it's less tight here, right? It's
Sure.
there's some sloppiness here and there. I think structurally the season didn't
Right,
completely
as we've
succeed.
talked about. Yeah.
But I think we've hashed that out enough. It's a great season. Could have been a little better, but overall, really great. Especially, again, this is basically her TV debut on this
And
kind
that
of show.
she's got some room now with an overall deal with HBO that that has some constraints, but that also gives her some room to play. Right,
Yeah.
she's not out hunting for her next thing. There's no that feeling of like, oh my God, what's my next project, and am I going to get it funded, and da 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 da. She can create now. She has the space to fulfill some ideas and some thoughts, and I think maybe that will give her some more room to run.
Right, because David Zaslav has never messed up a creative project. Never.
Well, there's some news about HBO the other day too. Their earnings call the other week was not great, but
didn't they just write off like a good movie?
Yes,
Because,
a couple of them. Yeah, Zaslav, but their cash flow is up, but their share price is down. But HBO and Casey Bloys, like they're kind of a strong independent unit within the Warner Discovery thing. But we're not here to litigate the streaming wars, so let's carry on with our emails.
I'm a little nervous about things at HBO. Anyway,
sure, fair enough.
Shall we move
to Duve?
All right, Duve71 writes in, Lore Master, friend of the pod, wrote in a novella. Gonna turn it into a blog post for our website. Gonna be a lot of fun.
And I just got that from him the other day, and it looks like it's about a 2,200 word blog post.
God.
So we're going to publish that on our website, and you can, email us for the link, or just go to lorehounds.com and go to the blog section. We'll probably cross-post it in the Discord as well.
All right, Duve wrote in a long email, as you said, David, but you have edited it down a little bit, so I'm going to read your edited portion. I have strong feelings about not wanting a show like True Detective to wrap things up neatly, and I also think that if you start hinting at more answers when related to the supernatural, it becomes less super. It sucks the mystery out of everything.
Yeah.
Navarro's...
As we've been going back and forth with different people on this, I think it's a fine line, and just kind of depending on your personal preferences, you might dip one side or the other.
Right. Navarro's walk out into the ice and the various examples we were told about in the show of the pull of what's out there got me to thinking on the whole long walk type scenario. In many Australian Aboriginal cultures, the walkabout is a traditional rite of passage. Traditionally, these journeys require the individual to live off the land for a period ranging from a few months to several years, traveling across ancestral lands and sacred sites. The walkabout is a spiritual journey that signifies the transition from childhood to adulthood, teaching survival skills, responsibility, and the deep spiritual connection to the land and ancestral beings. The walkabout is deeply intertwined with the concept of the dream time or dreaming, the central spiritual belief in many Aboriginal cultures that explains the creation and order of the universe. Through these journeys, individuals trace the paths laid down by their ancestral spirits, reconnecting with their culture, history, and the spiritual essence of the land. The walkabout serves as a profound personal and communal experience, reinforcing the individual's place within the community and the broader cosmos. The concept of the long walk in the context of Inupiaq culture does not directly correspond to a single universally recognized event or spiritual journey named as such, akin to the examples found in other indigenous cultures. However, in the Inupiaq way of life, deeply intertwined with migration, hunting expeditions, and spiritual practices, offers a perspective on long journeys that hold significant cultural and spiritual importance. For Inupiaq and Aboriginal cultures, the land is not just a physical place, but a living spiritual entity that sustains, teaches, and guides their way of life. The journeys are imbued with spiritual significance. They are acts of remembrance, healing, and renewal, offering profound insights into the interconnections of life, spirit, and environment. Through these walks, individuals and communities affirm their identity, heritage, and spiritual beliefs, ensuring that their cultural practices and connections to the land are preserved for future generations.
I really like this final point that he makes, that, a journey such as this is a way to situate yourself within your culture and within your landscape. And it's an affirmative. And it is something that you, by doing this, you really, get connected in a deeper way. And so I think for me, that's kind of what I see Navarro doing when she walks out, right? She's going to go on a walk and she's going to go hang out with different people and go to different places and use that connectivity to the land to not only process what she's been through, but to reconnect herself to something that she feels disconnected from, has been feeling disconnected from.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. And I think they did that a lot with, her discovering her name and then using that to connect
Exactly.
with B. Again, I wish they would have taken a more definitive stance on the
Right.
end, but that's a minor critique. I think overall it was a successful theme, especially, comparing her and Julia, her sister.
Yeah.
I think that was an effective contrast there.
And look for the blog post from Duve where he goes into more depth about this.
Yep. Overall, I enjoyed this finale and the series as a whole. I posted earlier last week that we were probably superimposing our own expectations of the horrific unknowns, whereas the reality would be more grounded. It was indeed, but totally plausible as well, and the reveal of the revenge on the perpetrators was done excellently. As is fitting, there are loose ends. It plays into the mythology of the region, the frontier of civilization, and the wilderness, the edge of the fabric of our reality, and the realm of the night country. Well done, Issa Lopez and team, and worthy entry in True Detective. Thanks again, guys, for a great start to the Lorehounds year. Lots to look forward to. Duve 71 somewhere in the night country.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks, Duve. That was a really cool perspective. It made me appreciate Navarro's journey a little bit more. My question is, what made the call of the wild, the call of nature, kill Julia and not Navarro and not,
Interesting.
Evangeline?
Right.
That's something that muddles the message a little bit for me.
And in an unplanned transition, that is going to be what the next email is a little bit about. But before we jump to Nicole's email, I did want to mention this idea that what Duve points out, which is what Rose had said, like, this is a place where the fabric is sort of torn and shredded a little bit, or, things are coming apart here. And I like the way that Duve has put together that idea with the idea that there are loose ends in this story, that it's okay for our story to have a little bit of loose ends because Enos is a place where things are a little frayed. So that works for me in a headcanon sort of way.
No.
Not allowed. Nicole
No.
B. So Nicole had, we emailed back and forth a little bit after she wrote this in. And I wanted to read this because she has a strong reaction to something here. And so I wanted to make sure that we're kind of aware that this is something that Nicole is has cares about. It's important for them. And so some of the lines of the email may seem like she's coming in hot, but again, it's because it's a place of something that she cares about. So she says, "Hi, Lorehounds. I was appalled and again confused by Lopez's poetic glorification of suicide as a theme or for this season. How many characters took their lives, and downplaying mental illness versus the spirit world, despite Rose's warning not to confuse the two. I cannot wrap my head around why Lopez would market a show around the horrific history of missing and murdered Indigenous women, only to have the main character, an Indigenous woman, willingly disappear. And Kim Nicole says this. I'm sorry, and take her own life. Lopez can demur to ambiguity in interviews, but this last scene was not like The Sopranos cut to black, a moment that was earned many times over in foreshadowing. This ending felt more like a cop-out in the storytelling rather than earned payoff. It's going to take me time to process my feelings on the season, but I can't understand why a story that was only 6 episodes long had to rely on suicide so much to tell it, instead of really digging into mental illness and the paths to getting better, both medicinal and spiritual. Lopez used the idea of taking one's own life as a convenient plot device. I don't think this was the theme she was going for, but it's impossible to ignore. Would love your thoughts. Thanks for your coverage. Thanks, Nicole. So yeah, like I said, Nicole and I emailed back and forth a little bit about this, and I totally get her point, which is there was a conversation around mental health, but then that conversation was never fully realized in the show.
Yeah.
And that's important to Nicole.
Goes back. Yeah. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying with Navarro, right? Like, why did one sister?
Yeah, exactly.
Why did it kill one sister and not the other? And I don't know what the message was there. I don't think they gave us an answer really. And
I think Nicole's putting her finger on that there's something that's muddled in there. And I would go back to saying 6 episodes is not long enough to tell that kind of nuanced story.
Right.
And that if there are quote unquote sins committed by this season of television, it goes to the compression. And it goes to the fact that we didn't get to spend a lot of time unpacking that stuff.
I agree with that. And I appreciate Nicole highlighting that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nicole.
All right. So Kyle M writes in with additional info about a true crime connection. Kyle is on the job. Hi there. Following a DM I sent David on Discord. Aside from this podcast, I also listen to a lot of true crime podcasts. You listen to other podcasts, Kyle? I mean, come on. Come on. The other night, I was going through a back catalog, trying to find one to listen to, and I stumbled across The Murder of Annie Lee. Okay, it's only one E, so I'm all like, wait, is it Annie Lee or Lee? All right. The murder occurred on September 8th, 2009, while she was working in the New Haven, Connecticut campus of Yale University. Annie Marie Thu Lee was a 24-year-old doctoral student at the Yale School of Medicine's Department of Pharmacology. She was last seen in a research building on the New Haven campus on September 8th. On September 13th, the day she was to be married, she was found dead inside the building. On September 17th, police arrested the perpetrator, Raymond J. Clark, a Yale laboratory technician who worked in the building. Clark pleaded guilty to the murder on March 17th, 2011, and was sentenced to 44 years imprisonment on June 3rd. The Connecticut Medical Examiner's autopsy found that Lee's death was a result of traumatic asphyxia due to neck compression, the same way Clark finishes off Annie in Night Country. Is that true? I thought it was basically like a pillow or cloth.
Well, yeah, he suffocated. Yeah, suffocation.
Yeah. I found the connection very interesting. Not sure if Lopez got any inspiration from the case or not, but a young lady being murdered in a lab by a man named Raymond Clark couldn't be ignored. I agree with that.
It's called the Generation Y podcast, and you can go look that up. So yeah, I heard on an interview on the Vanity Fair podcast, somebody else who listens to other podcasts, me. So you're okay, Kyle. Don't worry. Don't let John bully you into.
Oh, you can listen to whatever you want. I'm just joking around.
And they brought this up, and Lopez said, no, not at all. Like she had never heard of that case before. And
I don't believe you. No, I don't believe you.
And it's just totally weird life and art. Life and art. I mean, Jesus, it's a murder. But yeah, these two things accidentally mirroring each other. It's really wild. And Lopez was completely blown away and weirded about the connection as well. So apparently Clark is a hybrid name. She took a couple, like from an Arctic explorer, Clark. And then Raymond from from some other scientist or something like that. So, she constructed this before she knew it, according to her, and I tend to believe her. So, funny.
I don't believe her. I'll be the other side.
Right. Okay. We're almost done here. Ida, a new listener from Sweden, she got an email in between recordings, and she's got some experiences in living in North latitudes. Hey, Ida, we should exchange our pulp recipes sometime. She lives in Sweden, so I'm kind of Swedish.
Very nice.
Many thanks for a great podcast. Most recently, I've been listening to your comments on True Detective Season 4. Enjoyed it a lot. Thanks for also pointing out obvious flaws, like when people leave the door open like Liz did on a few occasions. If you're used to a cold climate and living in the countryside, you know to close the door the second you pass through it. Even a short time with the door open can lower the temperature in the whole house. Even my 5-year-old knows to make sure to shut the door really fast, or people will come running and yelling from all other parts of the house. But I like that in the series, they wore rather realistic clothing. It's not always so on TV, and I remember years of rolling our eyes and making face palms when warm hats seemed not to be invented in the Game of Thrones universe. I think one of the things too with costuming is sometimes bulky or appropriate clothing on that level. There might be some cost issues as well, but then just in terms of the practicality of filming, I know when they were talking about The Expanse, filming the film or the television show The Expanse, they talked about the difficulty of having actors in helmets all the time, reflections, air quality, circulation, heat. There's all these issues. So, big Arctic clothing could be, impractical at times. Anyway,
Definitely.
So in terms of living in northern latitudes, and the question of, whether you'd rather live in dark or light, Ida says, the answer is very easy. Darkness is worse. Where I come from, we don't even have polar nights, meaning that for us, the sun rises above the horizon every day, even in midwinter. However, even though we get a sunrise every day on my latitude, it does not mean that we actually see the sun or get proper daylight. In midwinter, the sun just makes it above the forest line and it's very overcast, which is 90% of the time. We only get something like a quote unquote blue day. When there is finally a sunny sky after weeks without it, it's the talk of the town. What did you guys do on the sunny day? Did you manage to catch the sun for a little bit? Autumn depression is a real problem for many people when the darkness is closing in, and the rest of us who don't get clinically depressed at least get tired, less social, and feel down. It's a physical reaction, and therefore I would claim the choice of whether long darkness or light is better or worse is not just a matter of preference, but it's also a fact that the human body is not adapted to life without light. Nobody except perhaps parents who are struggling to convince their young kids that and this is about living in daylight. Nobody except perhaps parents who are struggling to convince their young kids it's bedtime, even if it's full daylight, ever complained about bright summer evenings. IKEA also has an excellent selection of roller blinds and blackout curtains. Everyone longs for the light and excitedly shares experiences of signs that spring is on its way. For example, we tell news like, for the first time since last year, it wasn't pitch black when I went to work this morning. And I think I heard a bird yesterday. And I didn't even have to de-ice the car this morning. Thanks again, Ida. Thanks, Ida. Thanks for writing in from Sweden. I totally agree. I think light would be a better situation to live in than darkness. We can block out the light. We can't create the light in the darkness. So
Yeah, I can't imagine that. I live in the continental U.S., and so I don't have that problem. And so I'm sorry. I hope things are okay, Ida.
yeah.
All right, IKEA. What a thought. Should I go to IKEA?
I don't have one near enough.
Now that's
to
in
me.
my head.
Yeah.
Now that's in my head. I gotta go to IKEA. All right, Matt E finishes up our feedback today with a final email that says, had a long business trip and didn't get to watch the end until a couple of days ago. I think my comment holds up in the end. I saw this article online. True Detective Night Country is one of the worst mystery shows I've ever seen on Forbes.com. Made me laugh. Probably one pun too far, but it was a good documentary film. But was it a good documentary film, rom-com, or sci-fi? Nope, wrong question. I liked it. Okay. I liked it true to the end. A story about people and their stories. IMO, a perfect ending with people telling more stories. I give it a 10 for what it was, but I think that's mostly because I knew what I was versus wasn't getting into. You could criticize the main plot line, but the stories converge well, and as you guys have taught me, it's more satisfying to see everyone's self-interested actions come to a plausible conclusion. Oh, we're teachers now, David. We are training the samurai of the next generation. Like in Shogun. All right, I'm done now. Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, I agree with that. I think, the most important thing is that the characters acted in plausible ways, right? Like Matt's saying, and I do think that everyone acted reasonably. Navarro, maybe the one that I'm a little bit hazy on, but even her, I think going off and being alone is something plausible for her. The thing that bothers me is that I don't know how she went off alone, but that's but the character arc still works.
And spending time with Inupiat people on the ice, out hunting, doing, going out and reconnecting her, I guess, working her trauma out through walking the landscape. That's a time-honored tradition, right? And I think that fits. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Cool.
All right.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks everyone who wrote in. Thank you all so much for a really great season of television. I'm really glad we've got a fun community that likes to, talk about critique, not criticism. And I think everybody had a good time with this first show up for our January, February time slot.
Yes. Thanks, everyone. David, let's do a quick outro.
Very quick.
I just want to tell people about what we're covering next. We're covering Shogun on Hulu by FX. It seems like it's going to be a really good show. It's getting rave reviews. I'm reading the book right now and I'm really enjoying the story. It looks great. It looks like Game of Thrones set in feudal Japan, and that's awesome.
Or Game of yes. I'm trying to reverse it because Clavel wrote
the
first.
Show's new, okay? The show's new. All right. Anyway,
fair enough.
It looks really good. We're going to start covering that this week.
Yep,
should be up. I think Saturday we're going to release the public podcast.
Mm-hmm.
We also have Earthsea and Silmarillion stories going for the readers. We've got a second breakfast coming for patrons and a new Fireside chat sometime this month for patrons as well. So plenty of stuff going on. I know you've got Oscar stuff with Alicia.
Yep.
Alicia's not doing much beyond the Oscar stuff right now, but we're hoping that she gets on the Dune train again soon. We'll see what she's got going on her feed when we hear from her again. David, can you just give our patrons a little thank you?
Sure. To our patrons, well, first our Discord server boosters, Opus and the Machine, Gnarls, Aaron K, and Tiller the Thriller, and of course you, John. To our lore masters, our top tier subscribers, Samartian, Mark H, Michael G, Michelle E, David W, Brian P, Nick W, SC, Peter OH, Bettina W, Adam S, Nancy M, Do71, Brian 8063, Frederick H, Sarah L, Gareth C, Eric F, Matthew M, Sarah M, DJ Miwa, Andra B, Kwong Yu, who actually, I think, just switched over to our new Supercast subscription.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, same level, right? We're mirroring the two, but we'll talk about Supercast more a later time. But it's like Patreon built for podcasters. Anyway, Kwong Yu, thank you very much for subscribing over there. Jedi Bob, Nathan T, Alex V, Aaron T, Sub-Zero, Aaron K, Dally V21, Gnarls, and the last who is never last, Adrian, something like that. I don't know. Anyway, thank you all so very much for supporting our community. And we appreciate your ongoing efforts to create a fun and thriving space where we can nerd out on all the television and movies and books that we love.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. It's been a lot of fun covering True Detective with you, David. And I'll see you on our Shogun coverage.
Bye.
The Lorehounds podcast is produced and published by The Lorehounds. You can send questions and feedback and voicemails at thelorehounds.com/contact. Get early and ad-free access to all Lorehounds podcasts at patreon.com/thelorehounds. Any opinions stated are ours personally and do not reflect the opinion of or belong to any employers or other entities. Thanks for listening.